welcome to 2819. I'm Sandra Dimez.
And I'm Brian Rohenbacher.
And Brian, aren't you hot in that jacket? We're like in the middle of July.
You know, it's a little warm, but I figure if Indiana Jones can wear a jacket in the desert while saving the Lost Ark, I'm okay in the office for a little bit.
Touche. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm excited for today's show.
We're going to hear from philosopher and theologian Ken Samples as he discusses why are there so many churches. Kind of like fast food, there's a lot of options.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear Ken talk about that topic. And I'm also excited, we're going to hear from astronomer Hugh Ross on the topic, why do we have supernova? That should be fun.
First up is Culture Talk. Sandra will be talking with biochemist Fazale Rana on a kind of crazy concept these days, but civil discourse. And how can we agree to argue with truth and love? Let's check that out.
Now it's time for Culture Talk, where we discuss culturally relevant topics that you can use to start conversations about your faith. And I'm joined today with biochemist Fazale Rana. Welcome, Fuzz.
Hey, Sandra, thanks for having me.
You know, Fuzz, I hear you are going to be launching a brand new show from Reasons to Believe, and it's called Agree to Argue. Please tell us about this new show.
Yeah, well, thanks for asking about the show, Sandra, and your interest in what we're doing. I'm real excited about the program, as you mentioned, called Agree to Argue, and it's going to involve me, yours truly, as a co-host, along with someone by the name of Steve McCrae. And Steve is a very well-known non-theist who has a background in philosophy and science to some degree. And of course, I'm a Christian and a biochemist. And so we are going to come together once a month for about an hour and a half and live stream a lively, hopefully friendly, but also challenging conversation with one another about important topics that I think people of both communities are going to be interested in. And then after the program is broadcast live, we're going to release segments of the program as recordings over the course of a month. So again, the program will appear once a month where there's recordings in between each live stream. And then we also are going to have opportunities for the audience to participate in the program as well through the chat feature. And then on top of that, we're going to also record a bonus feature once a month called The Good, the Bad, and the Huh, which is essentially looking at arguments that each of our respective sides make that we don't think are good arguments. And we're going to explain why we don't think those arguments are good and what could be done to maybe make that same point in a more effective way.
Wow, that is a lot to unpack. So this new show, it's going to be where? Like, where can people find it?
Yeah, well, we have an Agree to Argue YouTube channel so that people can subscribe to that and then can watch it live there. And then also, this is where we're also going to have the recordings released as well.
So just the whole premise of the show, Agree to Argue, I think that's fascinating because you as a Christian and then Steve as a non-theist, you're actually getting together to talk about these topics. I think that's wonderful. And I think, you know, our viewers are going to be excited to kind of shift over and check out that show as well. Tell us some of the topics that you think you might be addressing.
Well, the first program, we're going to simply take a look at the fact that when somebody claims to be a non-theist or somebody claims to be a Christian who holds to a creationist position, that many times those viewpoints are misunderstood by the other side, and that people that are non-theists don't hold monolithic beliefs. People that are Christians and creationists don't necessarily hold monolithic beliefs. So part of the first show is just going to be simply adopting a posture where we tried to understand one another. But we're going to take on all kinds of questions like, can you be a non-theist and actually be a morally good person? We're going to take on things like, do bad designs in nature invalidate the design argument? So these are the types of topics that we'll take on in the show. Each episode is going to have a new set of topics.
And you mentioned that viewers will be able to interact with the two of you. So what is that going to look like?
Well, we're going to have a chat feature on the program as well as a super chat feature as well. So we're going to, throughout the course of our conversation, look to see what viewers are saying and incorporate their questions, their comments into our conversation.
So the fact that we have you and Steve together, I think is a wonderful example because you're providing an opportunity for people to say, let's not be scared of just being in dialogue with those with different perspectives. So I love that. And I love that we're also going to have viewers able to chime in and ask questions. What are you anticipating as far as the interaction and how different that might be from having just Christians interacting with our content?
Well, I think first of all, it's really important, I've learned, to ask questions of people who hold different worldview perspectives than you hold, regardless of your own individual perspective. Because so many times we just simply make assumptions or we stereotype other people's views. And so the first part of respectful dialogue is really understanding the other person. But we live in a world today that is so polarized. And it's not only that we're polarized, but we've lost the capacity for civil dialogue. That when somebody holds a perspective that's different than ours, we can't be friends with them. We can't extend respect to them or to their viewpoints. And so, what we want to do in this program is show that two people, very different perspectives, can come together, can enjoy one another, and have a fun, intense conversation where we challenge one another, but we also look to find points of agreement, common ground, but in the same time, have a good time doing it and actually develop a deeper friendship with one another in the midst of our agreements, or sorry, in the midst of our disagreements. So that's why we're calling the show Agree to Argue, is that we're going to argue, not to find agreement, but to find understanding. But we're going to agree that arguing is a great way to understand one another when it's done kind of in the philosophical sense as opposed to the combative sense.
Right. And that is the point exactly, because we are in this kind of cancel culture, hate speech. We see a lot of that just being online and even face to face. It seems like we've kind of increased that approach culturally, that we are canceling people, we are calling them out, we are using hate speech. So I love that this show will actually put two people from different perspectives together to show what it looks like, as you're saying, to agree to argue, because it really does seem like we've kind of forgotten how to talk to each other, and instead we just talk at each other, and it doesn't really it's not effective.
Yeah, well, again, people should go to the YouTube channel Agree to Argue to subscribe. And then we have also a website, agreetoargue.com, and all of our social media handles are at Agree to Argue. So that's how people can find out about the show.
Something that I'm aware of just working at Reasons to Believe with you and being part of the development team for Agree to Argue is that I know we're going to have a code of conduct. And I think that that's really important. So, can you explain kind of the purpose behind the code of conduct and why we think we're going to need it for this type of show?
Well, so often when people, again, engage with one another on social media and YouTube, because of the anonymity, many times people resort to the worst possible tactics. And so we want to make sure that as people are participating in the program, that their participation is at a high level, that there's just certain expectations we're going to have of people that are in the audience that want to engage with us, that we want to show respect and extend dignity towards one another. It doesn't mean we can't ask hard, challenging questions of one another or disagree, again, sharply with one another, but we want to do it in a way that promotes understanding and that ultimately reflects respect and an extension of dignity towards one another.
Yeah. Well, I am really looking forward to the show, Fuzz. And thank you for coming here to talk about it. So again, if you want to check out RTB's new show, go to agreetoargue.com. Also be sure to find Agree to Argue on YouTube and on all social media platforms. Thanks again, Fuzz, for joining us.
now it's time for RTB 101, where we discuss practical questions to equip you to share your faith more effectively. And here to help me talk about a very common question, why are there so many churches, is my colleague, philosopher and theologian Kenneth Samples. Welcome, Ken.
Hi, Krista. Good to be with you.
You know, I don't know about you, but I have encountered many non-Christians who put forth a concern about our faith as Christians, that maybe Christianity isn't true because there are so many different kinds of churches. You know, when I drive down the street just here in my town, I could see 5 to 10 different churches, sometimes right next to each other on the same street.
Right.
What's going on there? Maybe help us begin to think about that.
Yeah, I get that objection as well, Krista. I've had skeptics say, look, you make an interesting case for the truth of Christianity, but which church? Where do I belong? How can it be true? I think often non-Christians fail to appreciate that while there are many churches, that there is a core orthodoxy. That is, all of these branches of Christendom, Eastern Orthodox, Roman Catholic, and the denominations of Protestantism, conservative Christendom, they share a great deal of common ground when it comes to doctrine, when it comes to moral values, and to a worldview. And so it looks like that it is deeply divided, but I think what's missing is an appreciation for the deep common ground that we all share.
I think that's a very important point, because when we look at Christianity from a historical perspective, we actually see, a great unity for most of the church's history. There was East and West, and there were some differences in terms of emphasis and some slight issues there. But really what people are seeing is Protestants are very diverse. And that doesn't come about until much later in the church's history. So, how would you characterize this diversity among Protestants? Are these superficial divisions? Are they meaningful divisions that cancel each other out? Help us think about that a bit.
Yeah, I think if you think, first of all, about the 3 branches of Christendom, Eastern Orthodoxy, Roman Catholicism, and then Protestantism, if you look, for example, to the Apostles' Creed or to the Nicene Creed, you see this kind of collection of fundamental beliefs, and it is a profound common ground. Of course, the Orthodox and Catholics had a division, 1054. The Protestant Reformation takes place in the 16th century. There is more division within Protestantism, and I would say, as a Protestant Christian myself, I think Protestants need to give greater attention to unity. But again, most of the differences within Protestantism are secondary. When it comes to the Trinity, when it comes to Jesus being God and man, when it comes to Jesus' atonement on the cross, his resurrection, there is going to be solid agreement among conservative Christians. Of course, you always have the more liberal or mainline churches that have departed. But there is, again, a strong unity among all 3 branches, and a strong unity among the major branches within the Protestant faith as well.
I think that's a very important point, because many people may not have heard of this thing called the Nicene Creed, but that does kind of form a real core set of beliefs that we would say wasn't invented by the church, in the 300s. Rather, it's a summary, it's an accurate summary of what the church believed about the Bible itself. And so I think it's important for people to understand that there is that unifying foundation at our core. When we think about some of these differences, let's just take one of them, baptism. Some people dunk. They put the person all the way in the water. Other people sprinkle. What would we look for like that common foundation between us as Protestants?
Yeah, again, referencing the creeds, Krista, even non-denominational churches, and there are plenty of them, even if they don't officially recite the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed, sometimes they'll sing the creed, or they have some kind of doctrinal statement that covers that kind of ground. Certainly, it's true that there are going to be questions about things like baptism or the Lord's Supper. There's going to be a diverse viewpoints about those. But when it comes down to the essential elements, like who is Jesus, how do I become right with God, how do I live out the Christian life, I think, again, this is where the non-Christian does not see the important common ground that extends not only to doctrine, but to moral values and to the worldview. We all share a very common Christian worldview.
So when my non-Christian friends bring up this issue of divisions in the church, have you had success with using this approach of drawing attention to actually what unifies us first? Has that helped you in conversations?
I think so. I think it helps me to give a historical context to my non-Christian friends and to say, look, yeah, there are divisions. Sometimes the divisions can be rather sharp, but look at this common body of belief that has existed through the centuries. And all of the major branches of Christendom affirm it, as does Protestantism. And so I think that does help. I also like to encourage other Christians. I mean, I like to say, Krista, that I contend for the truth, but I pursue unity, and I try to do all of this by sharing charity. And I think Christians need to realize that non-Christian, when we debate our denominational differences, there's often non-Christians watching. And so we should start with our unity, and we should extend charity whenever we can contend for the truth.
I think it's a really important point. It reminds me of Jesus' words in John 17, where he prays for unity among his people, just as he and the Father are one. I think Protestants, we could do more to stand for unity, to start with unity before we get into all the division and what makes us different denominationally. So that's a really helpful way of thinking about it. I want to encourage all of our viewers, if you haven't yet done so, go check out Ken's blog. It's called Reflections. You can access that by going to reasons.org and search for Reflections. Thanks for joining me, Ken.
Glad to be with you.
Hello, Jeff Zwarenk, and welcome again to Give and Take, the segment of our show where we explore important scientific ideas and how they point to the creator of the universe. Today, we're joined by Hugh Ross, and we're going to discuss the powerful explosions that end stars' lives and how those are important to life here on Earth. Hugh, good to have you here today.
Well, thank you.
So there are these stars, Hugh, as you well know, that they burn through their fuel, and at the end of their lives, they just explode in catastrophic explosions. Why are these catastrophic explosions important for life here on Earth?
Well, you're referring to supernovae, and supernovae are stars that when they end their cycle, they have this massive explosion where they convert elements into elements heavier than iron. And those heavier than iron elements are essential for life. There's a bunch of them in your body that would, if you didn't have them, you would die. And then there's another event where you get two neutron stars merging together to make a kilonovae. About half the elements that are heavier than iron predominantly come from these kilonovae. So we need both kinds of events happening in order to have the elements that we need to live and also the resources we need for civilization.
So kind of describe, you mentioned twice that you're talking about elements heavier than iron. What is it about iron that makes it the turning point in these element productions?
Well, stars like the sun are fusing light elements to make heavy elements, and that works until you get iron. But if you want to make elements heavier than iron, you got to put energy in to transform these lighter than iron elements into heavier than iron elements. That's why you need a really super explosion to have the energy source that's sufficiently intense to transform these lighter than iron into heavier than iron elements.
So if I get what you're saying, below iron, as elements are fused together, they actually produce energy and
Correct.
will power a star, if you will. But when you get above iron, something has it that reaction actually requires energy. So you need something very energetic to provide the energy to drive the reaction. That's what you're
That,
basically saying,
that's
correct?
correct. Yes.
Okay. So what are some of these other elements that are heavier than iron that are important?
Well, things like copper and zinc, we all know we need copper and zinc to maintain health. But things like cobalt, my favorite is arsenic. If you don't have arsenic in your diet, you will die. But obviously, if you consume too much arsenic, that's also bad for you. We call these vital poisons. Consuming too much zinc will kill you. Consuming not enough will kill you. And that's one wonderful thing about planet Earth. We live in a planet where all these vital poisons, and there's 22 of them in the periodic table, that must be at just right levels so that we can actually live and thrive.
So we've got these elements that are heavier than iron, that are vital poisons. You kind of, if you could take one or two of these maybe and describe what are some of the consequences of having too little or too much. Because you refer to them as vital poisons, which if you don't have enough, you're poisoned. If you got too much, you're poisoned. Kind of describe some of the consequences for one of those, if you could.
Well, there's several life essential proteins that are built on arsenic. And
Mm.
so you need arsenic in your diet. Otherwise, you're going to be missing those proteins and you literally will die. But arsenic in high quantities is toxic. What winds up happening is you begin developing other proteins that are detrimental to you. And so we've all read these novels where some lady doesn't like her husband, so she throws a little bit of extra arsenic into his dinner, and after a few days, he winds up passing away. So that's an example of a vital poison. And by the way, you do not need to take arsenic supplements. There's plenty of arsenic just in the food and vegetables you eat that you'll be fine.
I think you may read different novels than I do, Hugh, but okay. So the supernova and these kilonova are important for producing these heavier than iron elements because they're vital for actually the functioning of life and particularly human life here on Earth. Are there any other heavier than iron elements that are important for life on Earth, not just in dietary requirements, but some other function?
Well, gold is an obvious example. We don't need gold in our diet, but everybody wants to have lots of gold because it's a product that is very useful for industrial purposes, has high value. I think what's most significant for planet Earth is the fact that we live on a planet that's super endowed with uranium and thorium. And those only can come from supernova and kilonova. And that uranium and thorium is crucial to provide enough eternal heat from the interior of the Earth to drive plate tectonics and to establish our magnetic field that protects us from deadly solar and cosmic radiation.
So kind of dig into the details or give us a little bit of the details because you think uranium and thorium, and most likely you're thinking poisoning from radioactivity or building a bomb out of them. How do uranium and thorium play into making Earth habitable? Give us a few more details there.
Well, Earth is super endowed with both uranium and thorium. Because of that, the uh, ferrous metals, the cobalt, nickel, and iron in Earth's interior, you actually get it hot enough where it becomes liquid outside of the solid core. And it's that liquid core of magnetic metals that actually establishes a dynamo which produces the magnetic field. And that magnetic field serves two purposes. It stops solar radiation from sputtering away our atmosphere that we need to breathe. And secondarily, it actually shields us from being bombarded by deadly solar radiation and deadly cosmic radiation. And what's wonderful, we have enough uranium and thorium, that magnetic field has been stable for over 3 billion years.
And so presumably the uranium and the thorium, as they're decaying, they're providing the heat that
Correct.
allows all of this to go on in the interior of the Earth.
Right. And they're long lived, so they can produce this heat for a long period of time.
So that's very fascinating, Hugh. what other things when you're looking at supernova and kilonovae just stand out to you as fascinating in these explosions that God has made so predominant throughout the universe?
Well, I'm amazed. I mean, as you are well aware, that kilonovae were only recently discovered when we saw two neutron stars merging together. And what really was fascinating to me is how many astronomers jumped onto that one event that took place. And we learned everything about kilonovae just from this one event. And all those telescopes focused on the event basically showed us how much of these elements heavier than iron crucially depend on Earth early in its history being close to a neutron merging event. Now, obviously, if we're too close, that's bad news. We get wiped out by the merging event, but if we're not close enough, we don't get sufficiently endowed with these crucial heavy elements.
Thank you very much, Hugh. I appreciate your comments today. It is just fascinating as we look out in this universe. There's a lot of things that happen that just appear very detrimental or damaging or dangerous. Who would think that a star exploding catastrophically at the end of its life, something that could wipe out life on a planet, is actually critical for advanced life on a planet? It seems like God has orchestrated things so that these dangerous, outstanding, spectacular events are instrumental in how he's prepared a place where we can live so comfortably. I'd encourage you to go to reasons.org. Hugh's written a lot about these sort of things, but particularly check out his latest article on why supernovae and kilonovae are essential for advanced life. It will give you great tools to go out and share this phenomenal, awesome universe and how it points to the God who created it so that we can know him better.
That does it for us this week on 2819. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that it equipped you to share your faith with confidence and compassion.
And we hope you'll subscribe to the show and that you'll also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We are at 2819 Show, and we would love to hear from you.
If you like the audio version of the show, you can get it wherever you listen to your podcasts. Just search Reasons to Believe Podcasts. But remember, if you're only listening, you don't get to see my cool jackets.
Or my cool hair.
See y'all next week, everyone.
Bye.